welcome to Our Canada, Our Future. I'm Aaron Woodrick. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a very hot topic that most Canadians are probably very familiar with, Canada's housing market. Obviously, over the past couple of years, housing prices have risen dramatically, leading a lot of Canadians to question whether they'll ever be able to afford a home. This has been particularly acute during the pandemic. But we want to dig into what's really going on here, what's causing prices to rise so much, and what can we do about it? And to discuss the issue today, we're joined by Stephen Moranis, a seasoned real estate lender and former president of the Toronto Real Estate Board. Stephen, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Great to be with you. Pleasure.
Now, Stephen, you're obviously a longtime commentator on housing issues. You've written at length on the topic. So I guess the first question I'd ask is, what is the primary cause of rising housing prices in Canada?
Well, I think the primary cause, we sort of look at the market supply and demand, and there's a whole bunch of issues around that with respect to pricing, demand, inflation. This is one of the places there's been common agreement. They all have checked in and have no question risen their hand and said, yeah, we got a supply problem. There is clearly not enough new housing stock being built in Canada. You know, the Canadian housing market has multiple markets. You can't really talk about sort of housing, and we're talking residential. Understand there's residential home ownership, and then there's renters. There's a third of Canadians actually rent, and their opportunities and options and rights should be protected as much as, you know, the homeowners. And so you've got markets which are localized, and yet people try to summarize sort of what's happening with place on a national basis, and it doesn't work because Montreal isn't like Toronto, and Toronto isn't like Calgary, and Calgary is Vancouver. And it goes on and on and on. There's maybe 15 to 20 major markets, and they all have different challenges with respect to supply and demand and sort of where things are going. I think with the pandemic, we saw some lifestyle changes in virtual becoming more popular, you know, from a health and safety point of view, an issue and those kinds of things. Also with schools being closed and people, you know, two working family members with kids at home, and, you know, you had to do homeschool and you had to work from home. It was tricky. So people said, geez, you know, I don't need to have the small condo in downtown Toronto because I'm working sort of in the central business district in one of the big towers. Let's get a slightly house, make sure we have high-speed internet, and let's live in Orangeville or let's live in Collingwood, etc. And it's no different in British Columbia and Alberta, where people have chosen to, you know, position themselves in a more rural environment, which may be a better, you know, style of living, a better large homes, more recreational facilities. I think people have gotten used to that, and in fact, it's not necessarily going to come back, that people of all of a sudden are going to rush to urban centers. I think what we've seen in the market recently, year over year, and let's take the most recent figures, April, and this is Real Estate Association, MLS figures, which is where probably 85 to 90% of all houses are traded on these platforms. The prices have gone up still in the sort of $2 million and higher price range. There's been some sliding of prices in the lower price range, and the volume is down.
Okay, so the fundamental issue you're saying, when you sort of sweep everything else away, supply is the fundamental issue with housing prices in Canada.
Absolutely, and supply has to be, you know, basically turbocharged by the provincial governments and the local municipalities, because that's where rezoning takes place. So, you know, if there's a site, and there's all issues about green belt and moraines, and you know, people want to be sensitive to that. And I think in the world we live today with climate change and all the, you know, the sort of pushes and pulls of what's going to be a better planet for us to live in, we can't take away, you know, all the natural sort of lands that provide forests and oxygen and all those kinds of things. But I think there has to be a lessening of restrictions to realize that, in essence, we've got to free up a whole bunch of land. I mean, Canada's a big country, lots of land.
Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking housing prices in Canada today with Stephen Moranis, former president of the Toronto Real Estate Board. Stephen, just before the break, you were talking a bit about needing to loosen restrictions to allow for more building. Maybe you could expand a bit on that. What do you think is necessary to help alleviate some of the supply issues in Canada?
Well, I think the governments, both federal and provincial, are sitting on a lot of land banking assets that they have to try to free them up quickly. In Ontario, you've got Downsview Airport, which is 450 acres, 500 acres. And it's just sort of, I hate to say, it's a slow boat to get developers to, put a shovel in the ground and start construction. Part of the problem, there was a test case years ago in Ontario when a developer goes to, whether it's intensification to build low rise or high rise, they submit all their proposals with engineers, architects, planners, and the like, environmental. It goes to municipality, and then they redo all that analysis again, which is a big delay. It could be another year or two, where there should be a way that if a reputable builder with reputable professional service people, suppliers, present a project proposal, there should be some way, it's like a construction bond insurance that verifies and protects that as being legitimate, and not have the municipality redo the work again for another 2 years. And this bottleneck is just happening over and over. It doesn't include, unfortunately, all the sort of not in my neighborhood stuff. So a development comes up for discussion and approval. And of course, you've got neighbors saying, I don't want that in my backyard. This, I don't want any more intensity. I don't want any more density. So all these things have to be worked out. And politicians, I like to call it, not in my term of office. It's NIMBY, and then there's, Ninto, not in my term of office. So like a councillor at the municipal level wants to side with the voters, and not because they're sort of riding a fine line of staying elected, doing the best they can, and yet not upsetting the voters. So I think that could be easily fast tracked. You've got to unlock supply and speed up the process. It's real simple. The other things, and some of the jurisdictions have been very creative. Vancouver, they're talking about laneway houses. So, where there's laneways, you put in small houses where, people want to live in those neighborhoods. You also can increase the number of units. So, take single family house neighborhoods and allow there to be duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes in those neighborhoods. What's wrong with that? I mean, that's the kind of thing to allow, the communities to grow positively, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, those are the kinds of things on the supply side which has caused the problems in the last couple of years.
I just wanted to quickly touch on a report that you co-authored with Murtaza Haider for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute last year. There's some eye-popping figures in that, such as the fact the average housing prices have risen by about 70% since the Trudeau government came to office in 2015, and almost half of that has been just during the pandemic. So I kind of wanted to ask, we've got about 1 minute here, what do you think accounts for the sudden spike during the pandemic as opposed to the demand that existed before the pandemic hit?
Well, I think, low interest rates were a helpful contributor to push up the prices. Multiple offers and blind bidding, in my mind, created a distorted price reality, because there were properties with a short supply and a peak demand, properties sold with 5, 10, 20 offers. And here's the reality: you could have bought a house for $500,000 more than the asking price, and that's pretty common across the country. And you were $300,000 more because of the way the real estate industry operates than the second best offer. And why should you be subjected to that? Because that $500,000 offer over asking, which was maybe $300,000 more than the second best offer, now becomes the price point reality for the next person who's going out to sell their house or to buy a house. All of a sudden, it got exasperated, as I would say. 80%, 70 to 80% of all the houses that sold on MLS in Canada last year were over asking price. No one is going to pay over asking price if there's not multiple offers.
Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking housing prices in Canada with Stephen Moranis, former president of the Toronto Real Estate Board. Stephen, right before the break, we were talking about the process of buying a house and how that's, in your view, really inflating some of the prices. So if blind bidding is a big problem, in your view, is it a simple matter of banning blind bidding? Banning blind bidding? Will that improve or at least ensure that some people are not paying far more than they need to buy a house?
A good question, Aaron. And I think there was definitely some thoughtful leadership from Prime Minister Trudeau in the last election when he came out bluntly and said, I'm going to criminalize blind bidding. He was right on topic, but from a practical point of view, real estate trading is the purvey of the provincial government. So the provincial governments are the regulators who basically oversee consumer protection. In Ontario, it's the Real Estate Council of Ontario. It's different sort of similar councils and regulators in each province, and they basically operate under a provincial minister. In Ontario, it's government and consumer services, different ones in different provinces, and they basically are all sort of following a Real Estate and Business Brokers Act, which is being changed in Ontario to the Trust and Real Estate Services Act. So, what has come out in Ontario? Let me just say this. The industry is self-interested, obviously. They want to keep the ability to give themselves the best benefit of making the most amount of money. And I think what they've come up with, which is such a convoluted proposal, and it's not going to be in effect till April 2023, is that there will be open bidding if the seller so chooses. Well, why would the seller, with the counsel of the seller's agent, want to have open bidding? You wouldn't. If you have the advantage of insider trading, there's no way you'd vote for open bidding. And why are you giving sort of an extraordinary right to a seller versus a buyer, right? Every transaction includes a seller and includes a buyer. But if you so to me, it should be mandatory. It should be open bidding. There's technology to do it. The industry is sort of said, well, what do you want? Everyone to show up on your lawn on a Saturday at 2:00 and it's going to be a crazy auction. It doesn't have to be done that way. There's technology now. There can be blind bidding, protecting buyers' privacy, names aren't shown. And the way it works, there's open bidding for a period of time. And maybe it's just it's a sifting process. And then the seller can decide who they want to go to contract with. Understand the seller doesn't have to accept the highest price. To just make it available only if the seller chooses is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, there are some other interesting kind of things that are coming up coast to coast to coast. Interesting. In British Columbia, if you're with ABC Realty, you can't represent the seller and the buyer. And in fact, if your colleague at ABC Realty has someone as a buyer, that's dual agency because it's under that brokerage of ABC Realty. Those two different agents who are running, independent contractor agents within ABC Realty can't basically represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. That's only sort of...
That's the same principle, Stephen. Sorry. That's the same principle for lawyers, right? They can't represent two clients on the opposite sides of the same issue. And so you're saying it's the same...
Absolutely. It's counterintuitive. It makes no sense. And the other thing, the industry is subject to a class action lawsuit right now, which is saying the way the industry works is the seller, you as a seller, are forced to pay the buyer's agent's commission with a whole bunch of rules. You never negotiate or meet or speak to the buyer's agent. What are they really doing for you? They're probably in a buyer's agency agreement representing the buyer as a client with a fiduciary duty, and yet you as the seller, because of the rules of multiple listing, make you to put that, you as the seller cannot put that house on MLS unless you're offering the commission to the buyer's agent, which coincidentally is always 2.5% to 3%. So there's a whole bunch of sort of resale price maintenance within the framework of that. And the class action basically is saying to all these brokers, all the sellers that you made pay commission to buyers agents, those are the damages, right? Those are the damages. Every other and this,
I'll have to stop you there, Stephen. We got to take a quick break, but we can pick this up right after this pause. Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking housing prices in Canada with Stephen Moranis, former president of the Toronto Real Estate Board. Stephen, I wanted to talk about some policy that's recently appeared in British Columbia. They've, I believe, introduced a cooling off period on house purchases. Could you sort of explain what's going on there and how it might apply nationwide?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is say, look, the consumers are being too pressured into a housing transaction, which is in most Canadians' lifetime their biggest purchase, and they should have some ability to sort of have a cooling off period. And this is common. Condominium pre-sale, low-rise, or builder pre-sale, low-rise, medium-rise, high-rise allows for cooling off period. So you've got like 10 days in Ontario, you purchase a condo, you can look through the documents and walk away with no loss of your deposit or obligation. They're suggesting in British Columbia that this be applied to resale. It's going to make it tricky because, what happens? You got multiple offers, someone paid $300,000 more than asking, and then they got 20 days to decide if they really want to go forward. I mean, people must be scratching their head on that one. I don't know how you're going to ever sort of reconcile, that legislation with how the common trading practices in the industry operate.
Okay. And also, we wanted to talk about, taxation as a way to sort of tamp down demand, because that's, of course, the other side of this equation. Some people argue that it's not just a supply issue. We want to, make sure that the demand is limited to the people who really want to buy houses. I think this is probably aimed at people who would be considered speculators or non-residents. So what are some jurisdictions in Canada doing to sort of attack it from the demand side rather than the supply side?
Yeah, well, I think Ontario's put in a 20% foreign investment tax. So if you're not a citizen or landed immigrant, you buy a house for $1 million, you're going to forget the land transfer tax, which kind of goes to the municipality, which could be 2 to 4% across the country on the purchase price. They're going to add another 20%. So on $1 million house, it's $200,000, and they feel by putting this restriction on, you're going to improve the supply opportunities for Canadians, first-time buyers, millennials, all that kind of stuff. The figures and stats that we've reviewed and researched, it's less than 5% has been foreign purchasers anyway. And so this isn't really going to do a heck of a lot on loosening up supply. And you know what? They're kind of realizing they're shooting themselves in the foot. Nova Scotia put this in. You can't buy properties in Nova Scotia. I think New Brunswick too, unless you're a resident of that province. How about all the people who want to, vacation recreationally, be in those provinces? No different in BC and Alberta. People live in BC and have a place in Alberta and vice versa. They're realizing, okay, we're going to fix the supply problem, and they're hurting their local economies big time. And they've backtracked. They've said proposed this, and then they sort of suddenly, we're not going to do it. So everyone's trying to do the right thing. Everyone's trying to do the best thing. but it's complicated. It's interwoven, interconnected. And, the biggest ultimate solution is opening the taps on supply. It's sort of like the oil industry. If you open the pipelines and get the oil flowing, the prices are going to go down. It's not. I just paid for gas yesterday in Toronto, $2.20 a liter.
Well, that's law of supply and demand for you, right? And just quickly on the Nova Scotia tax, we've got about a minute here. That also applied to Canadians, right? That was anyone out of province. So if you're a Canadian that wanted to buy a property in Nova Scotia, didn't live in the property full time in Nova Scotia, you would have had to pay that tax until they scrapped it.
Yeah, it was more. It was more restrictive beyond just not being a resident, a landed immigrant, or a resident or citizen. It was if your principal residency was in Toronto. I know a lot of people in Toronto, they go to Lunenburg, they go to Chester, they go to Mahone Bay.
Yeah.
What are you going to try to, kill the Muskokas of Nova Scotia because you figure this is going to help local people buy there? It makes no sense.
Yeah, that is talking about shooting yourself in the foot. Well, that's all the time we have today. Stephen, I want to thank you very much for joining us today to talk about this. This is a very hot issue. Of course, it impacts a lot of Canadians. I want to thank you, the viewer, for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next episode of Our Canada, Our Future.